skill more thoroughly. He believed that there was no dark magic better than a curse to buy time to prepare their main spell. One student immediately had a question about what types of magic take a long time. The professor liked such a question because answering it helped students know more about themselves and their opponent. He pretended to think and started with the dark magic that takes a long time to activate, and the first one on the list was summonology spells. After the lesson, Simon sat alone on the bench and thought about his choice of basic magic, for Professor Bahil's words had only added fuel to his doubts. Now he felt he needed help and decided to seek advice from Feyre. He asked if it was necessary for a battalion commander to specialize in summonology. Upon hearing this question, Feyre realized what he had been thinking about for so long and told him that there was no such rule. Feyre assured him that he could lead a battalion even if he chose another magic as a base. It was up to him to decide how to run the battalion, and his loyal commanders would respect his choice. Then Feyre asked him if he hoped the battalion commanders would stop him. Simon answered, a little embarrassed and holding his head, that to be honest he hoped so. After all, everyone around him said that summonology was a weak form of dark magic and that it was a thing of the past, even the summonology professor himself had said so. Then Feyre asked if that meant he would give up summonology. Simon hesitated and was slow to answer. But finally answered that no. Feyre chuckled and suggested that Simon was feeling what his heart wanted, and that he was worried about something else. Even Simon himself didn't quite understand what he was talking about and asked again. Then Feyre explained that it wasn't about quitting or insisting on summonology, but that he really just wanted to win the evaluation battle using summonology alone, and that was what was bothering him now, wasn't it? Simon was very surprised at this insight. He replied to Feyre that he really couldn't hide anything from him. However, he still needed some advice. Was he being foolish for wanting to win in this way? After all, there are types of magic that are much better suited for winning. Feyre asked why he thought that. Simon began to explain irritably that it just pissed him off. All those professors who say summonology takes a lot of time and support and that it's weak on its own. He's just tired of hearing it all. And even before he chose it as his major, he doesn't like the way summonology is treated. Feyre waved his hand at Elizabeth to get her to come closer. And then answered Simon that he had always chosen efficiency before and now he was having an internal conflict between that quality and his feelings. This was indeed true, but there was still the final question of what would be Simon's conclusion after so much reasoning. Simon seemed to have made up his mind and answered that this time he would follow his heart. He dreamily closed his eyes and asked Feyre to imagine what it will be like when everyone says he won't succeed. But he would still win with the help of summonology and show them all what he could do. Probably after that, Simon would have the wonderful feeling of having conquered an impregnable peak through his hard work. Feyre was glad to hear that, he thought so himself and tried to push him into it. One should gladly choose a path that others dare not tread, such a decision alone is already special and priceless. Simon should have remembered that. But Feyre didn't stop there, and added that Simon was the commander he had chosen. He should not pay attention to the restrictions that fools set, it is better to do as he wants. Simon agreed with him and was confident to win this assessment battle using only summonology. After a while, Professor Bahil found out about his decision and he was furious with him, smashing his office. He just didn't understand why Simon didn't realize that he was doing all this just for him. All those hints and help in class. Why the hell was he letting his talent rot in summonology? He gritted his teeth and screamed a silent scream, what the hell? Trying to catch his breath after destroying his office. When suddenly there was a knock on the door. An assistant entered the office and calmly asked if the professor was done giving vent to his anger. Professor Bahil looked at her with his crazy look, as if her days were numbered and something terrible was ahead of her. However, she had seen that look more than once during her time working with him. But in the end, her presence didn't make a difference and Bahil just continued to lament, complaining that he just didn't understand why Simon didn't realize that he would just become the next Aaron if he continued to delve into such an outdated subject as summonology. Looking at his old school photo, Bahil was sure that no matter how hard Simon tried or how much he excelled in summonology, if he chose to go that route, his maximum would be to become like Aaron, who himself was once special admission #1 and was once a promising student who had outstanding talent. And just look at how he is now treated by everyone in Kizen as a gloomy and unassuming professor who is tired of life. Looking at all this, Bahil was breathing heavily and rage was overwhelming him. Finally he couldn't stand it anymore and turned the picture over so that he couldn't look at this pathetic sight anymore. He loudly declared that they were all too pathetic and he just couldn't stand such weakness. They were both shining talents who were driving themselves into a bottomless pit from which there was no way out. Bahil decided that he won't just watch it happen again. Only he himself can bring Simon back to his senses. Only he can engrave and polish the raw gem into a piece of jewelry that will shine brightest in the world. Chiheko, listening to such a fiery speech, only exhaled tiredly, and asked him why he should not say honestly. Turning to her, he suddenly liked her idea and said that it sounded great. With his manic smile, he, this time honestly stated that he wanted him. Bahil wanted Simon to be his apprentice so badly that he was willing to pay any price and go all out. He was even willing to sacrifice his soul for him and was willing to see to it that his talent blossomed and reached its peak, and it absolutely didn't matter what it took. Chiheko, looking at him, only thought that Bahil was up to his old tricks again. He wanted to create the next Nephthys, only more powerful. Bahil was ready to sacrifice everything, his efforts, his care, his dedication, even his soul with his life. He was willing to put everything on the line to help Simon ascend to the world of the gods. In return, he wanted only one thing, for Simon to consider him his only mentor. And that when someone asked him how he got to the top, Simon would reply that it was because of his mentor, Professor Bahil. Just thinking about such a future gave Bahil goosebumps. He was enjoying his dreams so much that it looked like Chiheko was completely unnecessary here, so she said she was leaving to stay out of his way. But he suddenly grabbed her hand and didn't let her leave. Pulling her closer to him, Bahil told her that he was a man who needed to own whatever he wanted. Just like he owns her. Chiheko didn't seem to share his view of the situation at all. And stepping painfully on his foot with her heel, she claimed it was sexual harassment in the workplace. When she was rebuffed, the professor let her go and reminded her that she had not had the most attractive character since her student days. And he could not allow his successor as professor to be so harsh. Chiheko had not expected such a response, for she had thought that Bahil had already decided to make Simon Valencia his heir. The professor explained to her that she had misunderstood everything. There is no way Simon should become a teacher at Kizen, for he is far beyond that and will far surpass himself. He is a talent that would rival Nephthys herself and most likely outshine her. And Bahil was sure he was expressing his legitimate desire as a teacher. It would be abnormal not to be happy for such a talent. After these explanations, he looked at his assistant and asked her if she thought his predilection was vulgar still. Chiheko corrected her glasses and replied that she thought his desire to monopolize the right to teach was a vulgar obsession. But her words did not upset him in the least, even more so, they only fueled his excitement. Since Chiheko always had something to object to every word he said, Bahil offered her what he thought was an ingenious idea. Since Simon Valencia was now more or less satisfied with his skills in summonology. And that's not surprising considering his success with summonology in all practical tasks, but because of that he doesn't realize that he could achieve even more brilliant results with another type of magic. This has been a problem from the beginning of his Kizen training, he was doing too well and too fast. Now it is necessary for him to experience the most massive and bitter defeat of his life. Only then would he definitely reflect on his chosen path, discover the problem and correct himself. Chiheko was pleasantly surprised, that was the most sensible thing Bahil had said tonight. She wondered if he really wanted to purposely make him taste defeat. Of course he wanted to, and he thought it would be the easiest thing for him to do. The next day, Dick and Simon took a walk in the fresh air and discussed their schedules. It turned out that they had no summonology class scheduled for this week. Dick, who was always on top of the latest news and rumors, said that many Kizen professors were practicing necromancers, so the lesson schedule could be flexible because of the missions the professors were taking on. It was a real disappointment for Simon, he had hoped he could learn something else useful before the evaluation battle. Dick could only sympathize with him. The lack of summonology classes was really critical for Simon. They noticed that they had just put up a table with the allocation of opponents for the evaluation fights. While they searched for their names, Dick asked all the gods in existence to make sure he didn't get any of the so-called monsters, like a gifted students. Finally they found their names. It turned out that Simon would have to fight a certain Garen Koch from Class G. And Dick against some Ligong Chopra, also from Class G. Even Dick didn't know them, but he promised that since they were both G class, he'd ask around his friends from that class and find out all about their specialization and likely fighting tactics. Simon didn't even feel comfortable that Dick would do all the work for him. But Dick just waved him off, saying that's what friends were for. Simon was grateful to his friend, and he couldn't wait to find out what kind of dark magic Garen Koch was using. He couldn't wait for class to end today, because he had plans of his own. Dick knew at once that he wanted to go to private lessons after the lectures. This surprised Simon a little, and now he wondered how he had guessed it. Dick explained to him that it was easy, for Simon always liked to go to classes, but he wanted them to be over as soon as possible, and it made perfect sense. Still, Dick wondered, what was the point of Simon practicing if only a small fraction of the students could survive his deadly magical leg kick? Simon didn't like that his friend called his kick deadly and assured him that this time, he wouldn't use magical combat as his main skill. Then Dick asked in surprise, what was he going to use then? The answer was expected, summonology. Suddenly Dick showed him 2 fingers and asked him to choose one, well Simon chose one of them. Then Dick started to mimic Malin and said in a similar tone, don't forget what I told you. I told you to fight with magical combat. But just as he was starting to ask how well he'd done Malin, she appeared behind him. And gave him a good smack on the head with a book. It hurt enough, but in Malin's opinion, not enough. So she also advised him to die. How can you be such a retarded comedian? Finally in the evening after all the classes were over, Simon went to Rochester. He liked the quietness of the place in the evening, but unfortunately he didn't come here often. First he planned to visit the Necromancer store that Dick had advised him about, which, while it couldn't replace the professor's lecture, should help him prepare for the evaluation battle. There were many skeletons on display in the window of this store, making it impossible to confuse it with any other. When he entered the store, he was immediately greeted by the salesman and asked if he had come for something specific. Simon immediately replied that he needed skeleton archers. The salesman was surprised at such a request. He recognized Simon as a first-year student and didn't understand why he needed skeleton archers so early, as they were not easy to collect. But Simon insisted that he would like to try. The salesman reached for the boxes and praised his fervor. But still asked Simon if he knew that skeletons could have different stances, not just archers. Of course he knew that there were skeleton mages, riders, and so on. But still Simon wondered why skeletons were named after their specialties. The salesman explained to him that the simpler the names, the better, and asked him why he had chosen skeletons of archers. It turned out that Simon had tried to teach his regular skeletons how to shoot a bow, but it didn't work out well, they were too clumsy. Hearing his story, the salesman laughed good-naturedly. And started opening boxes. In the first was a Sapiro skeleton, the safest and most docile. It was perfect for beginners. It also offered him a look at a better quality skeleton called Vanilla. The specialty of this skeleton was that it was properly cooled during creation and its joints were smoother than other brands, also the magic circles were very carefully applied, making it one of the best skeletons on the market. Also, this brand offered excellent repairs. Hearing all this, Simon assumed that they must be very expensive. They were, and one box cost as much as 30 gold pieces. But the salesman assured him that the brand was worth the price. Fayer intervened with his advice and advised him to buy Vanilla, because even if the skeleton broke, they could make it part of their battalion or recycle it, so there was nothing to think about, it was worth buying. Seeing his indecision, the seller also offered cheaper options. The price gradually fell from 30 to 20 gold coins, but those that cost 20 were made by an unknown necromancer, and whether they would serve well or not depended solely on luck. Simon didn't want to take that risk, so he decided to buy 3 boxes of Vanilla. The salesman liked doing business with him, and Simon was in no hurry to leave the store and wanted to buy more. When he finally left the store, Thayer advised him not to make a big deal out of the fact that he had unexpectedly spent so much money. But Simon believed that he really needed it all. Well, Thayer wasn't going to argue with him and said that if that was what he wanted, he had nothing more to add, but advised him not to let these things go to waste and to use them properly so that he wouldn't have any regrets later. To this Simon agreed. As he was walking down a busy street in the town, he suddenly noticed a familiar silhouette. Simon froze in place. Then Thayer asked who he had spotted, a friend? But it wasn't a friend at all. It was Professor Bahil himself. And he was on his way to do his dark business. It turned out that he'd met one of the students there and performed some kind of operation on him. And judging by his satisfied smile, it was quite successful. This student's name was Garen Koch, and now Bahil was wondering how he was feeling. Garen felt overflowing with energy and a desire for revenge for all of life's injustice to him. With this power he was ready to crush Simon Valencia. When he heard this, he replied indifferently that he could go back to Kizen and live as before. He added, however, that he could not show his tattoo to the others until the evaluation fights, by which time it would be gone. Bahil also added that he shouldn't worry about it being discovered during the doping test, and that the curse would last for about 2 months. The boy wondered why he was helping him so much. He smiled and answered that it didn't matter, because he just had to do what he asked him to do. Which was to defeat Simon Valencia, the first specially enrolled student from Class A. He also reassured Garen, saying that he shouldn't worry about the special invitation, because he was much stronger than him now. Hearing this, the boy immediately raised his hand and clenched it into a fist. In the next instant, darkness erupted from his back, which immediately turned into a third hand. After which he slammed it against the table he was lying on before. Finally, really feeling the power of the strength he had been given, he thanked the professor, saying that he would never forget his help. He then asked if he should kill the guy since he was so annoyed with him. However, as soon as he said those words, Bahil's tone of voice changed very drastically. He immediately replied in a cold voice that he shouldn't do anything stupid and just follow his instructions. Then he added with killing intent that if something went wrong and he died, he and his family would not be able to die in peace. He added that he would make them suffer even after death, without bending down and looking straight into the guy's eyes with his murderous gaze. A look of horror came over the boy's face. From the shock he could no longer stand on his feet and just fell to the ground, then said that he would do everything right. Bahil looked at him with a cold stare, but he wondered how he could dare to behave like that, because he wasn't even worthy of being part of the plan. He was saddened by the fact that he had to resort to such methods, but there was no other way out, and he promised himself that he would apologize to Simon for this incident at some point. In the bright moonlight, he stood in front of the academy and said in a solemn voice that he would thank him in the future if he knew about it. At the same time, Dick entered the room where Simon was opening the box and asked if the guards had caught him, to which he replied that it was close, but no. Hearing this he asked why he was not in his room. He replied that he had come to collect a skeleton, since this time he had bought archers. Dick immediately asked with interest what brand they were, but something the one said vanilla. Praising his friend for his excellent choice, he pointed to the magic circle, and said that the instructions said that it was on it that the skull was to be awakened. This took Simon by surprise, and he asked what kind of circle he was talking about. Dick answered that he thought it was one of the techniques for creating magic circles, belonging to the dynamics of darkness, which they hadn't gone through yet. Ignoring the curious looks of the others, Simon began to look for the information he needed. After reading some obscure terms, he said with a clever look that he thought he could do it, which surprised Dick. Thanks to the information in the book, he was able to remember what Professor Bahil had once told him. It was that darkness works just like hands. If the flow is repeated hundreds or thousands of times, the darkness begins to repeat your actions subconsciously as it tends to memorize the flow. So his task was merely to set up the center and simply observe. With these thoughts he immersed himself and began to collect the darkness in his hands. Putting his hand on his skull, he said that the darkness would pass even without his intervention. Since this was the way the magic circles were set up, he activated the circle in the next instant, causing the skeleton's eyes to glow blue. Dick was shocked at what he saw, for he didn't understand how he had managed to do it just by looking at a book. Simon replied that there was nothing unusual about it, for the technique was similar to one he already knew. Looking at the manual, Dick said that it said it would take about 2 days to assemble the skeleton, and asked if he could do it, to which he replied that he couldn't wait that long, and would do it right away. Then turning to the already alive skeleton head, he smilingly told him to wait a bit, as he would quickly assemble it. After a while only Simon was left standing, while Dick slept sweetly. However, that was the price for him managing to collect the skeleton that now stood before him. After a while, the skeleton began to spin around the room, as if to show all that it could do. When he saw that he was more or less used to his body, Simon tossed him the bow that would be his main weapon. Moving outside, he ordered the skeleton to shoot at a tree. Concentrating, the skeleton immediately took aim. Then at Simon's command, it fired, traveling at breakneck speed across the distance. The arrow was instantly embedded in the tree. Simon had a happy smile on his face, as his efforts and money had not been wasted. But in the morning his joy was gone, for he had not been able to sleep well because he had spent the night collecting the skeleton. Seeing the terrible state of his classmate, Malin asked him if he was all right, and he replied in a tired voice that he was. At the same time, an excited Dick came running to them and immediately asked Simon if he was preparing the skeleton archer for his evaluation battle. When he answered in the affirmative, he advised him to forget about his plan. Simon was puzzled and asked why he was saying that. He replied that he had learned that his opponent, Garen Koch, was the son of a notorious family of necromancers, and was known to use the dark hand in battle. Malin added that this was a magic they had never heard of before, and that it was probably a family spell. Dick confirmed her words, saying that he was indeed pulling out from behind his back an arm that was made of darkness, and which was supposed to be good against archers, which meant that his skeletons were unlikely to work against that one. However, he also comforted our hero, saying that he had heard that he couldn't use other spells while using that arm. Hearing this, Cammy immediately concluded that catarology was the most suitable for fighting such an opponent. Malin also agreed with her, adding that he could win even with attrition alone if he kept his distance and cast a lot of curses on him. Their words really made Simon think, because he realized that he couldn't defeat such an opponent with just skeleton archers. But suddenly he had an epiphany and told his friends that he had a good idea. A few days later, Cammy, Dick, and Malin looked at the man who had once been their friend with horror on their faces. But Simon, who was furiously scribbling something with a pen and chuckling, wasn't listening to anything they told him. As if he were some evil genius, Simon continued to write something with a chuckle, paying no attention to anyone. His friends were very worried about Simon's miserable condition. Malin and Cammy reproached Dick for not being able to stop him as a roommate. Simon had already been in this condition for days and at this rate he would soon die. But Dick did his best, but nothing helped. For now Simon resembled some maniac who listened to nothing and only worked all day long on his plan and strategy of victory. It was frightening to look at him. So Dick suggested that they just leave him alone for the time being, so as not to make things worse. But Malin opposed that, saying that they just couldn't let him burn out a few days before the evaluation fight. Besides, he was already starting to scare the other students with his appearance. Malin decided to take action and walked over to Simon, causing him to shudder in surprise and finally tear himself away from his notes. He looked like addicted ones, barely resembling his old self, and it was immediately obvious that he hadn't slept in days. Malin could hardly bear to watch him suffer and advised him to go rest now or he would get sick. Even though the grade battle is important, but you also need to take care of your health or else you would start skipping classes and get bad grades. But Malin's arguments didn't mean anything to Simon, he was going for his goal and he wasn't going to give up. He just thanked her for her concern and asked her not to distract him and to come back to this conversation later. Suddenly Malin grabbed his cheeks and ordered him to open his mouth. The poor guy couldn't turn away anymore. Malin was about to give him one of the energy pills she herself had taken and advised him not to chew it and to drink water immediately. She wanted him to live to see the evaluation fights, but she still advised him not to rely on these pills for long, as it was not a solution, but only a temporary solution. This time Simon obeyed her and swallowed the pill with water. Immediately afterward he felt better and asked for more pills. But Malin refused him, repeating that she had already told him not to count on them, because they had side effects if overdosed. Then Dick asked Simon why he shouldn't talk to Professor Aaron. There's nothing wrong with asking for help, especially if you're researching a new-to-you type of dark magic and you're stuck on something. But Simon was sure the professor wasn't here in his office right now. But Dick had recently learned that he would be back today at lunchtime. This was great news for Simon, and he went to wait for the professor in the hallway leading to his office. A few hours later, footsteps were heard in the hallway, and as expected it was Professor Aaron. When the professor saw him, he was a little surprised to see him here, and even in such a form. He asked Simon Falentius, who was sitting near his door, what was he doing here? Simon immediately jumped up and explained that he was here to ask for advice. However, Aaron replied tiredly as always that his working hours were over. Simon didn't get the joke and was shocked by this response. He remained frozen in place until Aaron said that he was joking and he could go into the office. The study was full of all sorts of skeletons and just mountains of books. He had never been in Aaron's study before and was looking around with interest. The professor, seeing his indecision, offered to sit wherever he wanted and asked him what he wanted to ask. Sitting down next to the dried-up zombie and looking at him warily, Simon answered that he wanted to know how to win an assessment fight using only summonology. Pouring coffee, Aaron asked, why would he think of such nonsense? After all, he knows that Simon has shown his talent in magical combat, catarology and other more appropriate subjects. And right now, he doesn't understand why Simon wants to make life difficult for himself when he has plenty of ways to pass the assessment more easily. And put the cup in front of him. But Simon wasn't going to give up and asked the professor for permission to ask one more question. When a student who is going to make summonology his major wants to win with his major, can that be considered a good enough reason? Aaron took his time answering him and sipped his coffee. He silently stared at Simon for a while, sizing him up. Simon was beginning to regret coming here and asking such questions. But suddenly the professor interrupted his silence and asked what Simon wanted from him. To give him a ready-made solution or to complement his personal way of winning? Simon glowed with happiness and replied that he wanted the professor to help him finalize his plan. Finally, the day of grading came. But amidst the packed arena, the anxious voices of Simon's friends could be heard, who couldn't find him. Immediately there were complaints about Dick, who had shared a room with him and yet didn't know where he was now. Dick explained to them that he had not seen Simon since yesterday, and he had not slept in the room the previous night. So, he advised them to wait for him to go and look for him himself. Cammy and Malin stayed in the stands, where they were surrounded by many people. It was not surprising, because today's fights were extremely important to the students and also quite interesting to watch, so almost the whole school was here. The result of today's fight depended on which row of the standings the students would fall into, in case of victory in the middle row, in case of defeat, in the bottom row. And if they lost, they could end up in the bottom row. This would mean that the student would be on the verge of being expelled from Kizen. When Malin repeated all this, Cammy cried, not at all confident in her strength. Malin had to calm her down and assure her that everything would be alright. Cammy however was still shaking with tension and didn't understand why there were so many people here. Malin advised her to ignore the other students who just came for the exam, because they were just waiting for their turn. However, Malin didn't tell Cammy the whole truth. There weren't just students in the stands, there were also outside observers from the Dark Alliance who were interested in the talented students. They had probably come to observe Simon and the rest of the hopeful students. But Cammy shouldn't have said that, because then she would definitely faint from excitement. It was time to begin and Simon's fight was the first for the day. It was announced that Simon Valencia from Class A and Garen Koch from Class G would enter the arena. Garen came out immediately, but Simon was nowhere to be seen. So the organizers had to repeat his name several times. Garen grimaced and thought to himself, what a scoundrel he was. He hated with all his soul the rich nobles and specially enrolled students who were lucky enough to have parents and families who took their position and talents for granted. Now he was sure that he could smear this nobleman across the arena, and after the fight all the rapturous looks of the spectators would be fixed on him. Bahil had told him not to kill Simon, so it would be all right if he played with him a little. And he'll break his arm or leg at least, and break it in such a way that it won't heal and he'll remember it for the rest of his life. One of the assistant professors who was the referee today said that they were behind schedule, and if the opponent didn't show up in 5 minutes, they would disqualify Mr. Valencia and the winner would be Mr. Koch. Dick dragged Simon into the arena just in time and helped him reach his opponent. Simon apologized for being late and sent Dick to the stands. The referee told all competitors to put on their protective bracelets. The bracelets are enchanted with a barrier spell and should absorb damage from spells. As they put on the bracelets, Garen looked at Simon and thought that he looked really bad. He couldn't hold back a gloating smile. Now he was sure that victory would be easy. The fight would end if one of the participants fainted or the barrier shield reached 0. The command, "Begin," sounded and each of the opponents prepared for battle. Garen summoned his arm from the darkness and Simon a group of skeletons with shields. Garen was ready to slay his opponent. He knew that his opponent, although he wanted to specialize in summonology, was most dangerous with his magical combat. With Bahil's enhancement, he could now use his hand of darkness and curse spells at the same time. He was confident that as long as he kept his distance, he would not be threatened. However, his opponent was not doing at all what was expected. Garen didn't understand what he was up to and why was he stepping back. What was his strange strategy? Why is he stonewalling and pinning himself against the wall? What the hell is he doing? Maybe he's preparing some kind of spell. Garen decided he didn't care what the psycho was really up to. And he would deal with him quickly with an arrow from the darkness. But one of the skeletons with a shield deflected the arrow. Then Goran shouted to Simon to attack and used the curse himself. The skeletons couldn't help and the curse hit Simon directly. It was a curse of nausea. While Simon was trying to come to his senses, Garen approached and with his hand from the darkness began to smash the skeletons one by one. Malin began to reproach Dick for his information, saying that Garen couldn't use other dark magic while he was using his black hand. But Dick himself did not understand what was happening. Maybe for the first time he was mistaken or someone deliberately deceived him. Maybe he was even hiding his real power. He didn't know exactly, but one thing was certain. This bastard was much stronger now than before. How could he become stronger so quickly? The professors had also come to watch the fight. Bahil thought it was busy that his colleague usually never came to watch the evaluation fights of first-year students. So he asked Aaron what had brought him here today. After all, Bahil had always thought that he couldn't stand the suffering of the students because he himself understood the pain that awaited those who chose summonology. Looking at Aaron's grim face, Bahil said to him, "You refuse to be a mentor because of guilt, but now you have given in to temptation and taken one follower. Then behold, what torment our dear disciple will go through." Bahil was sure that as soon as Garen used another curse of exhaustion, Simon would be weakened and the match would be over. He even wondered what Aaron thought about it, wasn't he right? But he only said nothing and turned to leave. Looking at all this, Professor Bahil was surprised. He could not understand why Aaron was so indifferent to his student. And even asked him where he was going. Aaron took one last look at the arena where Simon was barely hanging on and said that, "The match is as good as over." And with a grim face he added that, "He came to see just in case, but there's no need anymore." This strange answer only made Bahil more tense. He felt that something was wrong. Meanwhile, Garen was about to finish off his opponent with another curse of exhaustion. With a flash of dark flame he activated the curse and was sure that his opponent was finished. The curse hit Simon and he only groaned softly. He fell to the ground in the middle of the arena with a thud. Garen, looking at how helpless he was, mockingly asked him, "How does it feel?" "It sucks, doesn't it, Mr. Special Admission number 1? Simon seemed to be holding on with all his might to keep from passing out and didn't answer. While Garen continued to taunt him, certain that he probably thought a nameless guy from Class G would be no match against him. How does it feel to be defeated by that guy? But suddenly, a moment later, Simon's hand was gripped by darkness, as if he'd been preparing something all along. He said in a confident tone, "Nothing in this world should be taken for granted." He rose to his feet again, staggering. Looking at him, Garen didn't understand what he was saying and asked if that meant he was giving up. Simon craned his neck and answered that of course not. A smile appeared on his tired face. Because it's complete now, and now it's his turn to counterattack. Garen started looking around in a panic, not sure what he was talking about. He looked around at the empty arena around him but still didn't understand what was going on. What was he preparing? Nothing had changed. Then Simon asked him, "Do you know what?" From what he said next, even Bahil was shocked. Simon announced to the entire arena that according to the detailed rules of the battle evaluation, Article 3, Paragraph 4, students who are participating in the battle evaluation shall be disqualified if they leave the arena during the evaluation. Hearing this, even his friends who were supporting him standing up, fell into their seats. Was he really going to escape? But then suddenly the whole arena shook like an earthquake and loud powerful blows were heard against the arena wall. Many cracks formed on the arena wall behind Simon, but Simon didn't seem to be bothered by it at all. He explained to everyone that, no matter how thoroughly he looked, there was no rule against bringing something into the arena. Finally, with a loud crack, the arena wall collapsed, creating a large hole through which a giant mud golem Cyclopes flew into the arena. Looking at the shadow looming over him, poor Garen was so frightened that he started laughing hysterically. He still didn't understand how the golem could be at the first grader's battle evaluation. The golem was huge and towered over Simon. Garen now thought he was completely insane for summoning the golem. The poor guy didn't understand how a freshman could summon a mud golem, because he had thought before that he would never even see one in his entire life. Malin and Cammy were just thrilled. Malin knew well that this was the spell that applied summoning magic to operate the golem's core. It's like the symbolic spell of summoners. She explained that a summoned mud golem is born from golem's core, made by clamping sand, mud and soil. Depending on the materials, the types of golem can vary. Even so, the spell is very complicated and none of the freshmen had ever summoned a golem in a combat assessment before. Simon had really done something impossible today. Here Dick intervened in their conversation and said that when he went to look for Simon he noticed something interesting. Malin also asked where the hell was Simon that he almost missed the evaluation. Dick explained that he was right outside the arena. He was burying a golem's core and planned all along to bring a golem in from outside of the arena. Now Cammy understood why he had been on the defensive from the beginning and trying to stay close to that wall. It was on purpose. Dick confirmed all her guesses. Indeed, Simon had moved to the side where the golem core was buried and was creating a golem outside the arena during the battle. And since the core was outside, there was no danger of it getting attacked. Even Malin was surprised at such a clever plan. It was brilliant. Garen looked at the golem and realized that Simon was just so freaking good at summonology. But still, he wasn't going to give up. Talent, wealth, social status, body, race, nationality. Everyone is born into different conditions, and that's why life is unfair. Garen already knew that. So he clenched his fist and gathered all his determination and decided that that's why he wanted to break it all this unfairness of life towards him. Now he wanted to punch in the face someone who had never tasted despair, someone who had everything right away and who only had things easy. But even so, looking at the giant golem, he realized that it was too much and all his enthusiasm evaporated. Clenching his teeth, he decided to try and attack it. Screaming, he struck the golem with his hand out of the darkness, but nothing happened. It was as if the golem didn't even feel his blow. Immediately after his attack, it was the golem's turn and the golem under Simon's control took a good swing. Simon even commented on Garen's attack, advising him to put all his strength and weight into it when he made a direct hit. The golem under his control struck so hard that Garen flew across the arena and hit the opposite wall. The wall almost crumbled and Garen was barely alive. Now everyone knew who the winner was and the official announcement was made over the arena. The winner is Simon Valencia from Class A. Now he could finally breathe a sigh of relief. The spectators immediately began to whisper among themselves, wondering how the freshman had been able to summon a golem and how he had been able to win without using any other magic than summonology. While his loyal friends couldn't contain their joy, shouting all over the arena how good he was and how incredible his strategy was. They even frightened the other students who were sitting near them. While Garen was being taken away from the arena on a stretcher, Simon was basking in the glow of his success. Every now and then there were cheers from the audience that Simon was the best. And he was indeed special admission number 1. Suddenly Simon walked up to the stretcher on which Garen was lying and startled him. Simon told him that he didn't know what kind of grudge he had against him, but he's never going to win against him with a power that isn't his. Garen shuddered. How could Simon know? Simon didn't get an answer, but silently looked at the stretcher with his opponent. Well, then, Simon said, and turned to his golem. It was time for him to leave, too, and he only bumped fists with his new pet for the last time. What an epic victory this was. When Simon left the arena with his friends and the golem, they immediately showered him with praise, saying how cool it was. But they were still a little hurt at him because he hadn't told them anything and had disappeared to parts unknown. Simon had to apologize for making them worry. Malin, in her usual manner, immediately said that she wasn't worried about him at all and that he was just imagining things. While Malin was convincing Simon of this, Cammy walked over to the golem and greeted him. She was so enamored with the golem that she turned to Simon and asked if she could ride the golem. But she was stopped by Malin, advising her to ask him later. Because Simon is using his darkness to keep the golem alive, and if he continues to do it for longer he will surely die of fatigue. From his shaking and tired look, it was already clear. Cammy immediately started apologizing that she was sorry for being so inconsiderate. Simon said it was no big deal, he himself didn't know that before he tried summoning the golem. After that he finally let the golem fall apart and all that was left of it was a pile of dust. In the middle of it lay the core that was the golem's eye. When Simon picked it up, Dick stared at it intently. He knew that the golem's core was worth a fortune, and he wondered how Simon had gotten it. The story, however, was quite ordinary, but he had succeeded thanks to his charisma, which left no one indifferent. Simon went back to the necromancer store where he had bought skeletons before. He asked the seller if he could buy a golem core for 610 gold coins that he had left after buying 3 vanilla skeletons. Unfortunately, the prices for the golem core started at 700 gold and the vendor wondered what he could offer in that case. Then the seller offered him a special discount of 50 gold and also agreed to get 600 gold now and 50 gold Simon would owe him. The seller also advised him to keep 10 gold with him in case of an emergency. Thanks to all this Simon was able to get this core, yes, with credit in spending all his money from the previous mission, but the main thing is that he was able to. Speaking of which, Simon was now wondering when the next mission period would be. Dick looked at him questioningly. Despite all his wit he somehow didn't immediately understand why he was asking. Simon picked up the golem core and explained that he had learned the hard way this time. But Dick still didn't understand what he meant. Then Simon turned and looked at the school and said that now he realized that being a necromancer is all about money, which is just needed to buy components. After a short break, it was Dick's turn for combat evaluation. His opponent was Ligong Chopra. Dick had prepared well for the match and studied his opponent closely. According to the intelligence he had gathered about her, Ligong is an enchanter, just like him. And she controls weapons at will using the darkness to form thin threads. Thanks to this technique, she was a tough opponent. But Dick had a plan to defeat her, even though she was difficult to get close to. He inhaled deeply and drew in a lungful of air. The next moment he was shouting across the arena, pointing his finger directly at his opponent. The name is Ligong Chopra, full name is Phlianka Chopra. A native from Daipak fiefdom in Shahid Kingdom. And Chopra is the name from her mother's side. A sage from her village opened her core. Ligong was frozen in place and did not know what to do. But Dick did not stop there and continued to reveal all the facts about her. It took her a year from opening the core to her first darkness. She's good at hunting and her hobby is to cook. She were assigned to Class G after she entered Kizen and her subject test score was 70. The first friend she made is Narsha Abra. She want to major in darkness dynamics, but she's very much interested in magical combat too. So far she was still holding back and not showing any sign of it, so he moved on to the heavy artillery. And he started telling her that she has a minor knee injury, she's 5 feet 4 inches and weighs 60 kilograms. And her bust, waist and hip measurement is. And she couldn't take it anymore and she yelled at him, "What the hell are you doing? Shut up." That's when Dick realized he'd hit the mark and got her in the right state. Now he summoned the strange black staff and told her it was always worth keeping your friends close and your enemies closer. And now he knew her weaknesses better than anyone else. Dick stuck the staff into the ground and said that was why he was so interested in learning about others. That was why he had studied her so well and so diligently that he had found an effective way to counteract her. Now he wondered what she thought about it. Li Gong was so furious that she couldn't find any other words except to shout to him again to just shut up and die. While immediately attacking that insolent man with all her swords. But suddenly all her swords stuck to Dick's staff with a metallic clang, instead of slicing it into little pieces. Quite looking at it all, Dick explained that it's sort of an electromagnet and it attracts metal that has the same element. And since her swords are made of carbon steel and amerinium alloy, they're pretty easy to neutralize. He also discovered that she bought 20 swords but no armor whatsoever. A silver coin appeared in his hands. Creating a magic circle and preparing a spell, Dick assumed that she must have let her guard down because she thought that he was just a pure enchanter. But that was a big mistake, because thanks to the information he had gathered, he had a strategy to defeat her. So he began to fill the coin with darkness. After all, its weakness is long-distance accelerating attacks. After collecting enough darkness, he fired the coin. It flew so fast that Li Gong didn't have time to dodge, still shocked by what she heard. The coin hit her forehead, knocking her out. And she fell to the ground with a thud. Then a voice called out, "Stop the match, Ms. Li Gong Chopra has passed out. Mr. Dick Hayward wins." He was just basking in the glory and was in no hurry to leave the arena, greeting all his imaginary fans. Malin and Cammy only clapped awkwardly at him, afraid to show that they knew the narcissistic bastard. Watching his behavior in the arena, Malin said that she should have been happy that her teammate won, but why did she feel so embarrassed? Cammy couldn't help but agree with her. Next, it was Malin's turn. When the fight was announced, Malin Villine from Class A and Eben Barshani from Class C. She was confident of her quick win and Simon and Cammy cheered her on, not doubting her success. As she entered the arena she met Dick on her way out but ignored him completely. Leaving him behind to stare at her perplexed. Dick didn't seem to understand why he was being treated that way. When he approached Simon and Cammy, he asked what was wrong with Malin, had something happened. But his friends didn't want to upset him, so they said it was nothing at all. And since Dick was here with them, they asked him to tell more about Malin's opponent. It looked like her opponent specialized in magical combat. Dick confirmed their guesses, for she did look impressive. But still, the key point of this battle is whether she's able to get close to Malin or Malin can push her away. Eben saw her opponent and said that she didn't expect her first opponent to be such a big shot. Malin just looked at her arrogantly and said, "Oh, yeah. Remember this moment as a source of honor for your family, commoner." Hearing such an arrogant answer, Eben decided to give her an unforgettable experience and completely stomp her face into the dirt and watch her sing when she was defeated by a commoner. And immediately launched a frontal attack on Malin, who had a surprise behind her. As soon as Eben got close enough, she used her prepared spell, saying how naive her opponent was. Eben barely had time to cover herself from the stream of fire. Malin only laughed at her pathetic and primitive attempt to win, and advised her to give up before she had to fry her. Simon watched the fight admiringly and didn't understand how Malin was able to use dark flare so quickly. Dick explained that it wasn't dark flare, it was the darkness elemental flame and it was easier than dark flare. This spell uses the darkness to express the elemental magic of pure wizards reinterpreted in a modern way. That flame has a slightly black shade and that's the flame's characteristic. The casting time of this spell with magic circle is much shorter, so necromancers can cast it even quicker than the pure wizards. As Simon thought about what he had heard, he remembered that he had heard that spells were stronger and easier to use when they were cast with pure elements such as fire, water, earth, and air. For Malin, this was indeed the perfect improvement. Meanwhile on the battlefield, Eben realized that, it's tricky to just avoid the attacks and now she could really see that Ivory Tower's really on a different level. But still, she thought that she still had the speed advantage. And all she had to do was to keep distracting her and make her stop using the dark flame. Then once she got a chance, one single chance, when there was a minimal pause between Malin's attacks, then she could attack. Meanwhile Malin had used another spell and now it was a true dark flare that engulfed the arena. Malin repeated again, didn't she tell her? She really is too naive to expect to win. But Eben didn't see it that way. In her opinion, it didn't matter how strong her opponent's spells were. After all, they would all be meaningless if she couldn't hit her. Eben was confident in her speed. And began to run fast circles around Malin, confusing her and asking her if she could beat this. Eben was sure that Malin wouldn't be able to keep up with her movements and it seemed that was the case. Because suddenly Eben was able to be at her back and was already preparing to give her the final blow. But what was Eben's surprise when her blow didn't reach its target? Because Malin had just dodged it. And now mockingly asked her, did you really think I'm so bad at magical combat that I couldn't dodge a punch like that? In the next instant she simply fried her opponent with a blast of dark flame. Eben was too close and couldn't dodge in any way. So the match was over and Malin Villine was declared the winner. She had behaved almost like Dick, but now she did not seem to be embarrassed by it, she had plenty of pride. Now Dick looked at her and said that she was being so irritating, but he could not say anything against her because she was too good. Simon agreed with him, indeed in Kizen talent was valued above all other qualities. Each of them realized that they would never want to fight against her in the future. It would be better for them to compete amongst themselves. But then a strange sound from behind caught their attention. They wondered where that sound was coming from. It turned out to be Cammy, who was shivering with worry so much that it could be heard for several meters around. She was really worried that all her friends had won and she now just had to win too, so as not to let the others down. Now that it was her turn, she was terrified and asked herself if she could handle it.